The man was brilliant. The man was brilliant, still is brilliant. But on the basketball court, he was, as we say today, the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Michael Jordan. I'm a little bit partial being a North Carolinian. He was from Wilmington, loves North Carolina still, does a lot of good things for North Carolina. But Michael Jordan in his heyday was untouchable. There were some great basketball players who played against him, and they feared him because even in the depths of the flu, he could win championships. I mean, this man played sick with a fever of over 100 degrees. He was brilliant. And when he first went pro in 1984, Nike came out with a shoe that had a silhouette of Michael Jordan on it with his famous dunk pose. And so the Jordan brand was born in 1984. And at the time, Nike thought, wouldn't this be great if this brand would bring us, $2-3 billion over the next 3 or 4 years? That would be great, because they're looking at the average lifespan of a pro basketball player, thinking that, he could blow out his knee, he could get hurt, and the career is over. So we're going to milk this brand for all it's worth. Maybe we can get $3 billion out of it in the next 3 or 4 years. Today, the Jordan brand generates $3.1 billion in revenue for Nike. Michael Jordan, in his entire basketball career, earned $93 million from playing basketball. Today, as an old geezer, even older than me, he makes $100 million a year from his endorsements. And the largest portion of that comes from his Nike Jordan brand endorsements. I'm Russ Siegel. I'm the executive director of the Sequoia Fund, and I am really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today. I have with me Dr. Per Cap himself, Shawn Spruce, and we are going to be talking about what just happened with the NCAA and this rule change that has kind of shocked the sports world. It has rocked a lot of people's worlds, and we were talking about this before the broadcast. I think we're both of the same mindset that we're too old for collegiate sports, so we're a little bit neutral on the whole thing. But no doubt it's going to change things. And we're not just talking about the rule change and what this means for collegiate sports. We're going to be talking about what this could mean for your small business, because it could be really exciting. Shawn, how you doing, my friend?
I am doing great, Russ. Wonderful to be here. That's just mind-boggling what you said about Michael Jordan and that Jordan brand. The business of sports is it's just unstoppable. Even just within the last 20 years, the amount of money that's going around, not even, there, of course, pro sports, there's always been a lot of money in pro sports, but college sports, different types of what we consider amateur sports, just the Olympics, it's just staggering. And sometimes I almost think of it as being like a bubble. And, we think about investing bubbles, asset bubbles. Earlier this year, we were talking about meme stops like GameStop, and now all this cryptocurrency buzz. And I think you talked about years ago, there was the tulip bubble, and hundreds of years ago. And
1600s in Denmark.
1600s in Denmark. And sometimes I think that sports could be a bubble like that too, and these huge salaries. I don't think there's any guarantee. I think we have this mindset that's just going to continue to go up, and these salaries are going to go up and up and up. And with careers being shorter than they used to be in some of these sports, and injuries, and it seems like these athletes are becoming more and more expendable. And I sometimes wonder, is America eventually just going to get kind of fed up with sports as they are, and we're going to see just a real deflation of sports salaries, endorsement deals, revenue from teams, athletic departments. And, earlier in the year, we also talked about esports and how they're really taking off. And, a lot of colleges now have esports teams. Mars Hill, it's on their athletic department website, an esports program. And I think there's scholarships that are going to become available for kids that want to do esports. And how's that going to play out into college sports and beyond? But right now it's hot. It's hot,
no
and
doubt.
it's happening. And it was official as of July 1st. The NCAA, for years, they fought this vehemently. They did not want to in any way either allow college athletes to be compensated either by universities or on their own to seek endorsement deals or anything like that. And finally, they caved, and they made it official. They suspended a bylaw that they had in place that prohibited student athletes from monetizing their name, image, and likeness. So we call this NIL for short. And the deal started very quickly thereafter. And this was something that they were ultimately pressured into. A number of states passed state laws that allowed college athletes to pursue deals using their name, image, and likeness. And eventually the floodgates just got too high, and the NCAA had to concede and went ahead and changed this bylaw so that college athletes can have the opportunity to monetize their name, image, and likeness. So, yeah, it's controversial. What does this really mean long-term for sports, for amateurism? I think the cat was out of the bag a long time ago. I think anybody that really thinks of college sports as amateur sports, and unfortunately that hasn't been the case in many, many years. These are billion-dollar industries we're talking about. Some of these high-grossing college sports departments, athletic departments, are multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenues. And, you see these coaches with 7-8-figure salaries. You've got assistant coaches at some of these schools that are making more than university presidents.
Oh, yeah.
These locker rooms and workout facilities that are appointed like 5-star resorts. And then what's so bad is these colleges, they just like boast it. They just kind of throw it in everybody's face. And then here you've got these kids working their tails off to compete, to play, to win. And sure, they get scholarships and they get perks. And there's certainly a lot of privileges that come with being a high-level Division I college athlete. But holy cow, they're putting a lot on the line. They're taking tremendous risk in some of these sports that they could be injured. There's no guarantee that all of these kids are going to go pro. The vast majority of them will never go pro. They'll never make these huge, huge multi-million-dollar deals in these contracts that we see with the superstars in the NBA and the NFL. So, they're finally going to give these kids the opportunity to make some money while they're in college. As college athletes, and we'll see what happens.
Now, before we jump into the athletes themselves and what this rule change means, what do you obviously, if your college is nicer than my college, and your locker room is nicer than my locker room, and your field is in better shape than my field, and your stadium is newer, aren't you going to have a leg up just in terms of being able to draw athletes who want that kind of environment? And we look at dorm rooms now. Yeah. When we were in college, we were lucky to have a roof over our head and a window that would open when the radiator went to 117 degrees in the winter and you couldn't turn it off. Now, these places are like 5-star resorts. So on the academic side, colleges are trying to beef up the wow factor. And it's no different in college sports, but I think we're going to see this juiced up even more because of this.
Yeah, well, what you mentioned there too, the way these colleges can entice athletes and sell them on their facilities, sell them on these perks. That actually is part of this whole issue, because shortly before this whole bylaw was suspended, the Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA is unfairly allowing these universities to market and sell themselves to these student athletes or these prospective student athletes by advertising these different services, by these different perks. And ultimately that's to the detriment of college athletes. It allows them, it's not a competitive environment in terms of how to secure talent or to recruit talent. And it falls under this whole antitrust category that we talked about on one of our earlier broadcasts. So there's a lot of working parts to this whole thing. And it's crazy. It really is when you think about it, the amount of money. And yeah, I remember when I went to school, I went to Haskell in Lawrence, Kansas. So that was really bare bones. I remember we didn't even have mirrors. We didn't have glass mirrors. We had like stainless steel mirrors.
Yes.
It wouldn't break. It was like being in jail.
It was prison mirrors. Yes, you're exactly right. I remember
and
those.
Somebody would dent one, and then it'd be like being in the fun house because you'd have this distorted view of yourself in the mirror. And I remember you'd get in the shower, and the water was always cold, and the only way it would heat up is if somebody flushed the toilet. You'd be in there taking a shower, and somebody would come, hey, do me a favor, go flush the toilet, warm up the water for me. OK Hall, for any old Haskell rascals that listen in on this and watch our broadcast, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, man. I don't know if I'm torn between good memories and PTSD.
Well, years later, I went to the University of New Mexico, and when I was there in the early 90s, it was they had like a really kind of old school cafeteria set up with trays, and you went through the line. It was good food, but it was very, very much like an institutional setting. And
yeah,
a few years ago, I walked through the student union there on campus, and they've got Sonic, they've got all the fast food brands, and like you said, it's just, and there's workout facilities, and there's all these cool little wireless. They're selling an experience.
Oh yeah.
I think when we went to school, and I know we sound like we're these old curmudgeons at this point.
I am a curmudgeon. Get off my lawn.
When we went to school, it really, not to say that they're not selling education. These kids aren't getting good education. I don't want to go there, but it's a lot more about an experience. You come to college and the dorms and just living this kind of lifestyle that just wasn't part of the package when we were kids.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, I know one of your favorite things to do when we talk about a big topic like this is you like to talk about who the key players are. And of course, we're not just talking about players in the metaphorical sense where this is concerned, right? We're talking about some of these people are players.
Absolutely. Let's bring it on. Yes, some actual student athletes and who is posed to really benefit from this financially. So let's start out with this old guy in the middle. That's Mark.
We always start with the old guys. Yes, always with the old guys.
He is the president of the NCAA, and this has been a really hot topic on his desk for a long time now, this whole idea of compensation for student athletes. And the NCAA, like I mentioned earlier, has fought this really hard, and finally they created a task force about a year ago to really look into this in more depth. And finally, they created this new alternative prohibiting or suspending this bylaw that allows athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness. So he's part of this whole thing. And this is a work in progress. I think we're going to see changes. I think we'll see developments. I think ultimately, how this all plays out in terms of what the financial opportunities are for college athletes, I think it's going to be this is a work in progress. But as it stands now, it is what it is. NIL deals are now allowed in the NCAA. And this guy, Mark Emmert, it's on his watch. So I think he's going to be a key figure. He has been for a long time and going forward as well in terms of how this all plays out. So let's look at a few of these college athletes here. This gentleman here, just to the right of Mr. Emmert here, Bo Nix. He's the quarterback of Auburn. And right away, he went out and signed an endorsement deal with Milo's Iced Tea. And I'm a big fan of Milo's. We've always got a gallon jug of Milo's in our fridge.
It's thick enough to pour over pancakes. You get that good sweet tea.
Cane sugar, good stuff, good stuff. That's one thing I really learned about when I moved out here to Western North Carolina. I really got hooked on the sweet tea. But he's just one of many, many athletes that right away inked a deal, and we're seeing deals with soft drink brands, video game companies, just really some different, very creative, some some athletes are looking at these non-fungible cryptocurrency tokens. There's a couple of quarterbacks from Florida, and they've partnered on creating an online platform which will actually link college athletes with businesses that are interested in hiring them for public appearances. That's smart.
That's where the gold is right there.
I think so too. I think so too, because it's about, really creating something sustainable beyond your own brand.
Yes.
So, and I think, the big college revenue sports are football and men's basketball. And I think a lot of times we'll think, well, that's probably where the money is for these college athletes, if you're a football player or you're a men's basketball player. But the ladies are getting in on this too. And the lady on the other side of Mark Emmert, her name's Olivia Dunn. She's a gymnast at LSU. And she's actually considered to be potentially one of the athletes that could profit the most from these NIL deals. She's got over 1 million followers on Instagram. And she's already signed a handful of different endorsement deals with companies, businesses all around marketing her brand. And she's got a fantastic website. It looks like, something a Fortune 500 company would have. I mean, she's just perfectly poised to really profit and benefit from this. So another lady, Lexi Sun, she's a volleyball player at the University of Nebraska. She signed NIL deals already, and she's actually got a partnership with a company that makes volleyball equipment. Wow. So even though these are sports, gymnastics, volleyball, women's gymnastics, these aren't considered big revenue sports. These are student athletes that are still going to be able to benefit from this whole trend of NIL deals. If we look at the local level, I did a little bit of research to see what's going on with schools in and around North Carolina. And word on the street is the hottest NIL deal right now is with this basketball player at UNC Chapel Hill, Armando Bacot. And he's partnering with a company called Jimmy's Seafood. And he's got apparently a pretty lucrative endorsement deal with this seafood company. So I haven't heard anything from athletes at WCU or some of these smaller schools, but right. I imagine opportunities will present themselves as they come up. And lastly, we've got this other guy here, Spencer Lee. Now, Spencer Lee is a college wrestler. He is perhaps the best college wrestler in the country right now. He's a 3-time NCAA champion. He's a winner of the Hodge Award, which is like the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy for college wrestlers. It goes to the top college wrestler every year. And you think of wrestling, it's not a big revenue earning sport. It's not a particularly high popularity sport. But this kid, he signed with a sports agency, and it's actually the same sports agency that represents Trevor Lawrence, the superstar quarterback that just went out of Clemson, drafted out of Clemson. Yeah. So it's not just these big name athletes. It's not just these big name sports that we're looking at. It's not just male athletes either. There's a lot of athletes that have the opportunity to benefit from this. But I think one thing we do have to stress, though, primarily what we're looking at are athletes that are competing at a really high level. Like this Spencer Lee kid, he's a stud. He is one heck of a tough wrestler. And there's some other wrestlers as well, national champions, who are getting deals. But we're not seeing these kind of deals to these lower tier athletes that aren't All-Americans, that aren't, really superstars, unless they've got like a heck of a lot of charisma or they're just really intriguing. Like some of these athletes might just have a lot of already an existing image or something like that. So,
well, when you talk about Olivia Dunn, she kind of brings a lot to the table. When you've got that many followers already, you're almost bringing influencer level branding to you're bringing your own brand to the commercial brand that wants to sign with you. So it really is it's kind of mutually beneficial at that point. They're getting the benefit of all the reach that she has.
Right. And she's invested a lot in that. She's built that brand as an amateur, as a gymnast. And again, college gymnastics, it's not a big money sport. So I'm sure she's not going to be able to go pro and make tons of money or something like that. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities there for businesses that want to work with some of these athletes, and it's going to be interesting. I'm be really curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah, maybe we need to do a follow up in about a year and check in on them, see what their bank accounts look like.
Yeah, and at this point, there was a sports attorney that was quoted in an article a couple of weeks ago, and he said that for sure by the fall there will be some six-figure deals. You'll have athletes that are making more than six figures, over $100,000 with these NIL endorsement deals. So, how much higher can that go? Could we see an athlete making $500,000? I don't know. They're saying one of the athletes that's most poised to profit off this, in addition to Olivia Dunn, is another athlete from LSU. It's a football player. His name's Derek Stingley, and he's a defensive back, and he's a star. He's an All-American. He's projected to be a top 10 draft pick next year. So he's already, he's probably going to go big, make a big salary in the NFL. But what's interesting is not only is he a great player, but he actually wears number 7 for the Tigers, for the LSU Tigers. And that's a really special number, and people really like that jersey. And some of these schools are taking a different approach. Some of the schools are really pretty much like, you athletes, if you want to go out and do this, you're on your own. Obviously, you have a right to do this now. You can do this lawfully, but we're not really going to support you that much. It's pretty much on your own. Other schools are kind of like, yeah, we'll help you a little bit. In this case, LSU is going to allow him to market off that jersey. He's going to allow him to make money as the jersey, wearing the jersey number 7. So that's kind of unique. But yeah, they're saying he could benefit a lot, not only because he's a really good athlete, he's high profile, but simply because he's got that number 7. So it's interesting how some of this is playing out for sure.
For years, we've seen athletes who are sort of in between college. They've graduated, but they haven't really put on the Denver Broncos uniform or the Raiders uniform, whatever it is. And we always see them in this uniform that has no logo on it. So it's kind of the generic red or blue. And it just basically says football on it, right? And go team. But now, it is just a number, right? And people associate Olivia Dunn with LSU, the purple and the gold. They associate these athletes like Armando with the sky blue, Carolina blue. So they're already being associated with these, and I think it just makes sense to take that next step and say, it's good for everybody if they can be seen in that. Do you think at some point we could see this being an incentive, a positive incentive to stay in school, for the bigger name athletes, for people who are in the big money sports? There's always been this incentive to go pro early. You got somebody who can leave school as a sophomore or as a junior and go ahead and get their career underway, because if you stay around another year, you might get hurt and then you lose all that opportunity. Yeah. But now you've got kids who, this may solve a lot of money problems that they've had all their lives. Who knows? This is not only going to be life-changing for them, it could be changing their entire family's life. And do you think that could be an incentive, maybe not to go pro, but to stay?
It's going to be tricky though, because I think the athletes that are most poised to benefit, or this is really going to be a game changer for like some of these big stars. They're like Armando Becca, he's going to go on to the NBA. He's going to make a ton of money, whether he gets an NIL deal now or not. Right. But some of these lesser players, some of these guys and women that are never going to go pro, but they're good athletes. Okay, Alabama's got this great football team, but most of those kids on that team are not going to play in the NFL, but they're going to contribute to these national championships. They're going to tear their bodies up. And for athletes like that, who might not ever get drafted, or might get drafted and get cut, or might only play a season or two in the pros, it presents a real opportunity for them to get a payday and monetize all of that effort that goes into being a really competitive college athlete. I think some of those lower tier athletes, people that aren't going to be these top draft picks, I think it presents a real opportunity for athletes like that. But in terms of like the big picture, you also have to, I just read some research by some some people that are really looking into this and studying this. And one of the concerns is that this could impact financial aid. Okay. Like needs-based financial aid. And their fear is that for like lower tier athletes that aren't going to get these huge NIL deals, they're not going to get, Milo's isn't going to pay them $100,000 to drink Milo's on the sideline. Right. But for these lower tier athletes that could get smaller deals, that could potentially jeopardize their financial aid and actually put them in a position where they would actually do better for going on an NIL deal, just taking their financial aid. They'll actually make less with NIL, and they'll forfeit their financial aid. So they'd be better off just letting it go and getting and taking advantage of their using their financial aid. So I think what's going to be tricky is it's going to be tough. I think that for these players, I'm worried that a lot of them are not going to maybe be savvy enough or be experienced enough to really negotiate these deals on behalf of themselves, to really understand the pros and cons, how to leverage these different pots of money, these different financial opportunities that they have as students. And I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of sports agents and vultures that will lead them by the hand. But again, I think though, like everything, there's going to be some people that win really big, and there's going to be some people that don't win big. And that's something that, it's there's definitely it's going to be tough in terms of how to actually make this work and well, maybe this what it means for amateur sports.
Maybe this opens up a whole other tier of sports agencies that people who are more attuned to college athletics can start sports agencies and help these younger kids ink deals and learn how to deal with their money. I mean, the statistics on pro athletes who are broke within 5 years of leaving their sport is phenomenal. I mean, it's really scary. And you probably know these numbers. I'm not going to throw out the number because everybody knows that 87.623% of all numbers are made up on the spot. And so, but it's staggering, really. So I feel for these kids who they're getting a jump start, and maybe they are in one of these sports like wrestling, who's just whoever thought somebody in wrestling could make money, and now they've got a whole new set of problems to deal with.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at your next slide here, because you just got some interesting stuff here talking about big money sports.
Yeah. So this is average revenue by sport, and this is the average NCAA athlete. There's 350 schools in the NCAA, and that's Division I, Division II, the smaller divisions as well. There's 350 total, and if you break it down by average football program brings in over almost $32 million a year. So it is hands down, football is the big dog when it comes to generating money. And you can really break college sports down into revenue generating sports, which actually make a profit for these schools. And specifically that's football and men's basketball. Those are the only two sports that really, really bring home the bacon in that regard. And then you have the non-revenue sports. That's wrestling. That's water polo. That's golf. That's women's softball, fencing, all these other sports that just accrue. Yeah. And they're great sports. They're wonderful sports. I wrestled in high school. That was my sport. But people don't want to pay to watch people wrestle on a mat. People don't want to pay big money to watch people race a boat, rowing boats or some of these sports. So yeah, the big sports are football and men's basketball. Third cut is men's ice hockey. And there's really not that many hockey teams in the NCAA. Phenomenal. Yeah. But for the teams that have good hockey, schools that have good hockey teams up in Minnesota, Michigan, New England, those schools have big fan bases. That NCAA tournament, they call it the Frozen Four. That's broadcast on the cable networks. That's big money there. That's a big deal. And a lot of those kids already have, they've already been drafted by NHL teams. Yep. So, they're kind of being conditioned to be pro players anyways.
Pro hockey is moving south. I mean, look at what just happened in Florida, right? So I'm not a big hockey fan. I'm not a hockey. Okay. I'm the opposite of a big hockey fan, but I have friends who are just huge hockey fans, and you see the popularity of the sport moving into these lower latitudes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of schools are picking up on this. That is a significant revenue generator if you've got a decent team.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is one NCAA hockey team, varsity team, in the South. University of Alabama, Huntsville has a Division I team. In fact, I actually went to a high school because I actually played a little hockey. I didn't play in high school, but I played in Pee Wees and I played in the Bantam leagues when I was 17 back when I was living in Michigan. And the goalie from our high school team, he actually got a scholarship to play at University of Alabama, Huntsville. That's D1 hockey team. But yeah, so these are the big sports. All the other sports make less than $1 million a year on average. So
yeah,
that's what's driving it.
Wow. So what we talk about nil, which in Britain, nil means nothing, right? So this is far from nothing.
Yeah. So an athlete, their name, I could, if their name is on a specific endorsement, or if their name is in a video game, these video games where they have the player's likeness on there, they could profit on that. Their photograph, drawings, sketches, any image that represents them, their physicality, or even just their likeness. For example, with the video game, it's not actually them playing, but it's an avatar, something like that. That's all ways that they can profit. They can monetize through endorsement deals. They can sell those images. They can allow somebody, they can lease those images. However they want to structure that deal, they have the ability to do that now. However, one thing that's important to clarify here, there is no pay for play. They cannot be compensated for what they do on the field. So these schools cannot offer salaries. They can't be compensated in any way for what they actually do on the field. It's strictly name, image, likeness off the field. And that's a big thing too, because I think a lot of people ultimately think that where this is going to go is these athletes will be paid salaries just like pro athletes are.
So we got to look at the other side of that, though. They're not being paid to play. But if somebody gets injured and they can't play, do they get to keep the endorsement? My guess is no.
My guess is these, probably like everything else, the athletes that are really high profile and really worth a lot to these companies, they're going to be able to structure their deals so they cover bases like that more effectively than other athletes. It'll be interesting. Good point. That whole issue of athletes being hurt too, because they have these loss of value insurance contracts,
right,
for athletes. Like if a kid is going to go pro and they're expected to make a lot of money in the pros, but they get hurt in college, right? But the only thing about those loss of value coverage contracts, those insurance contracts, is that it's only in the final year of eligibility. So it's like when an athlete's just that year before they go in the draft. And it's usually only an option for somebody that's going to be like a top 10 draft pick. So if you're a Trevor Lawrence, if you're a one of these big star players from Alabama, then yeah, you might have an opportunity to protect yourself financially in that regard. But if you're somebody that's not going to be a top draft pick, you're probably not going to have an opportunity to get loss of value insurance. So you're still going to take that risk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned earlier, yeah, this could impact financial aid. It's tricky in terms of how this might play out and how it benefits athletes, restrictions.
Yeah. Again, we're looking at a longitudinal study here. We got to watch this thing over time. Nobody's going to know this year. It's just too new. Right. But we've got some athletic departments. We've got some schools that are some big hitters. I mean, these are like brands themselves. Right?
Absolutely. Huge brands. And I don't think this is any surprise here. We know that football is the top grossing sport, right? So these are the top 10 grossing athletic departments back in 2018, 2019. This is a few years old, but these are all big football schools, right? Number one, Texas A&M, Ohio, these Big Ten schools, Ohio State, Michigan. And then you've got Georgia in there, Penn State. I mean, this just reads like a who's list of college football here. And so we're talking well over $200 million a year for some of these schools, even, LSU over $150 million. So this is, that's what's paying for so much of the, these huge stadiums and these athletic departments with locker rooms and so many of these perks.
This makes it hard to justify not paying or not allowing athletes to be paid.
Yeah.
I mean, you see numbers like this, and you see schools that are maybe they're struggling to outfit their biology department, or they're needing to put in a new lab building or something, and the stadium is just state of the art. And so, yeah, you can't ignore this. I mean, this is amazing here.
That makes me remember there was a movie about 30 years ago called The Program, where James Caan played a college football coach, and he's getting grilled by these school administrators about his football program and how he's violating all these rules and all this. And he says, yeah, I understand that, but with all due respect, I've never seen 80,000 people pack a stadium to watch a kid do a chemistry experiment. So, no, I don't, I feel bad for all the other kids that go to college and just figure out as best they can how to pay for it, and they don't get special perks. They don't have awesome dorm rooms. They just tough it out to get a degree, and which is the vast majority of college students. This is a tiny little sliver of these very unique, very exceptionally talented young people that have this opportunity.
So, to your first point on this slide, yeah, some athletes stand to make a lot of money and some don't. But I think when we talk about entrepreneurship, when we talk about business success or even success in life, the one thing that we're always afraid to talk about is luck. And I know that people say, well, the harder I work, the luckier I get. But let's face it, some people are just born with a natural talent. Tom Brady isn't a day older than he was the day he went into the NFL. I think there's, and there've been television shows like fictional cartoon. South Park has done some stuff on how Tom Brady never ages, and there are some people who are just have this God-given natural talent that other people don't have. But I think we have to throw the E word in here, equity, when we start talking about how some athletes are going to make money and some don't, because whether I am a very lucky person that I was just born with a physique that is naturally built for swimming, like Michael Phelps. I mean, he's said over and over that he just happens to be built for that sport.
Yeah.
I mean, he works hard, no doubt, but there are just a lot of physical attributes that make him what he is. We can't really discount luck, but we also have to look and say, what does this do to a team in terms of equity? When you've got a quarterback who has a huge deal with Milo's, but the three people or the three people who are directly in front of him, the center and his two tackles, maybe his two guards, what are they getting? They allow him to do what he does. And I think we see this argument in business all the time that, well, the business owner couldn't make all that money if it weren't for the employees putting in the hard work, right? And so it's the age-old argument that always comes up. It'll be interesting to see how athletes, how teams, how coaches especially deal with some of that perceived and maybe not perceived, but maybe very real inequity.
I agree. And I think what it does is it creates more of a professional dynamic, because that's what happens. Tom Brady is this ultra superstar, hundreds of millions of dollars. And then, most of those guys that he played with on the Patriots, they didn't make anywhere near that kind of money. These guys are just fighting every year for a spot on the roster. There's no guarantee they're not going to get cut. Right. The average NFL career is 3.5 years. So I think it's going to, but I think a lot of people would tell you it's probably already like that at the NCAA. I'm sure. You got a third string player on Clemson versus Trevor Lawrence. That's probably a very similar comparison between Tom Brady and somebody else, a lower tier player.
It's just more painful it's just more painful to acknowledge it now that we have to acknowledge it, right?
Yeah. But you also make a good point. This whole idea of sports and this idea of, is it nature or nurture, right? Because some sports really rely so much on just God-given athleticism, that fast twitch muscle fiber, the speed, the power, and you've either got that or you don't. And then other sports,
you showed that you showed the two extremes on your second slide. You've got the gymnast, who are traditionally very short, and you got the volleyball player they're traditionally very tall. So if you've got this kid who starts out as a gymnast and all of a sudden she hits a growth spurt, she can't be a gymnast anymore. I mean, you're not going to see any 6'2" gymnasts in the Olympics. I would. Somebody's going to prove me wrong. As soon as I say that, somebody's going to prove they'll be like this 6'4" Russian woman who's a gymnast and she just blows everybody away in Japan. But so you do have some of that just happens, right? That you've got somebody who stays very, very short and compact to be able to do all those flips. That's just part of it.
I think what's interesting about young kids in sports and high school athletes and college athletes is I think there's sports that you're built for, and then there's sports that you're passionate about. Like I played hockey, I was average. I wrestled. I was actually below average. I had a losing record my senior year. I loved the sport, but I just wasn't very good. But the sport that I actually had a lot of natural talent for and potential was cross country. And looking back, if I really should have focused on cross country. It wasn't something that I was passionate about. And I look at a lot of my friends like that. It seemed like a lot of us were like, I had one friend that was a really good baseball player, but I think he would have been a really good hockey player if he'd had a chance to play hockey. He just never did. I had another friend that was a really good football player, not a great football player, but I think he would have been a really good wrestler. He kind of had that work ethic and that kind of mindset to be a really good wrestler, but he just wasn't quite in that perfect sport. So yeah, it's kind of like a lot of it is just like, it's a perfect storm of getting somebody in that perfect sport that completely complements their natural attributes. And then you combine that with the coaching, and then on some level, they've got to have the drive and the discipline. It's a 1,000,001 proposition really to become a superstar athlete.
You got to have that intersection of ability and passion, because if you don't like it, you just don't like it. Like the kid you were talking about who decided, I'm not going to do this anymore, and dad was disappointed. But hey, you do have unicorns out there, right? You've got the Bo Jacksons, you got the Deion Sanders, people who are multi-sport standouts who are just fantastic. And I mean, you talk about 1 in a million. Now you've got somebody who has the ability to play 2 different professional sports.
Yeah.
And both of them were very, very good at both football and baseball.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess my whole hang up with this is that kids already today, there's an old saying that every second grader wants to be a veterinarian. They don't know anything about running a tire shop or building batteries for homes, battery backup systems or anything. They want to be a vet. By the time they're in high school, they all want to be Michael Jordan. They all want to be this great athlete, or they want to be this high paid athlete, and they see that in their future. I just have to wonder, is this going to add to that mystique? And is it going to overinflate certain people's impression of their own ability? Let's say. I tried to say that as nice as I can. I don't want to say this kid's no good. What is he thinking? But is it going to serve to overinflate his impression of his ability?
Yeah, I think that's a real risk, and I'm concerned with the parents, because I feel like parents have really, really spoiled, or just really just created a real mess with youth sports. And behind most of these really high level young student athletes is a gung-ho parent. It really is. I mean, and I know, like, all the guys that I ever wrestled with that were really good, their dads were coaches, or their older brothers had wrestled. And it's amazing how many of these kids that are really good at football or basketball, they've got a parent that was a coach or a really good player.
Yep.
And they're gung-ho. They're pushing them 100%. And when we were kids, we were taught to try different sports, to play a lot of different sports. And in fact, the logic was that actually helped you, made you a better athlete all around by playing baseball in the summer, basketball in the winter. And now these kids are, and a lot of this is the coaches and the parents are pushing them to specialize at an early age in one sport. Mm-hmm. So these kids are just focusing on one sport to the detriment of everything else. And just all the time that's put into that sport that could be spent doing other things, learning how to play an instrument, or just even things aside from other sports. They're not getting that opportunity necessarily. And,
Well, economists look at opportunity costs all the time. And if you've got a kid who is an aspiring violinist, but is nudged into basketball, for example, or tennis. Tennis is not a low pressure sport when it comes to parents. That's one of those things that you see a lot of. The parents are just as rigorously enthusiastic as any basketball or football parent. But you've got these kids who, if they spent their time playing violin, they could be a world-class concert violinist, right? But because they're spending their time doing this one thing, they don't cultivate that talent. And again, you've always got those unicorns. There's exceptions to every rule, but I would say in general, you're right on the money in terms of how the parents, and this has been a long time coming. Parents we've been really crappy for a long time in the way we push our children, and I'm as guilty as anybody. But I think you just hit the nail on the head that we take a lot of that blame.
I think another thing I think that athletic achievement, it can be so bittersweet because, and I'm a fan of sports. I played sports growing up. I encourage my daughter to play sports. I think they teach a lot of great life lessons.
Absolutely.
You grow and you nurture. I mean, I look back at high school, junior high, and I had a lot of great teachers. I had a lot of interesting people that I worked with over the years as a kid. But the person that I feel that made the biggest influence on my teen years was my high school wrestling coach. Hands down, more than any English teacher, history teacher, science teacher. I keep in touch with him. I mean, I speak with him on the phone every few years. Just we talk. We still stay in touch, and that impact was so powerful. That coach, player, wrestler, athlete relationship is really, really special when you have the right coach and you have a good athlete. But yeah, when I look at sometimes like how as a society, how much we place the priority that we place in it. And I think one thing that's tough about sports, like you mentioned, being a musician or being a concert violinist, if you master that skill, you carry those skills with you your whole life. You can still play that violin when you're 90 years old, probably. That's right. But the sports, you're going to peak at a young age, and then that's it. Now, maybe, you grow, you'll learn. Maybe you could coach, but you invest so much in these skills that are only going to decay. They're only going to erode. You just have this very limited frame of opportunity where you maximize the full potential, and then it's downhill from there. And to invest so much in something that's fleeting like that, as opposed to intellectual knowledge or other types of skills, artistic ability, things that have more staying power over the long term, I think that's something that people don't always think about. It's true. Especially with parents and families.
And while you were saying that, Bruce Springsteen's Glory Days started playing on a loop in my head. We won't play that here for copyright reasons, but go look it up. If you're not familiar with Glory Days, it tells the story that it illustrates the story that Shawn was just talking about. So we've talked about how some of these players are going to make money, some are not. They're going to be winners and losers, just like in everything. And I'm not necessarily going to call them losers because they're still getting a college education. And as you know, Shawn, you can learn just as many valuable lessons from a bad coach as you can a good coach. There are a lot of things even a bad coach can teach us that we don't want to do that. I don't want to do that to my kids. I don't want to do that to the kids who I coach someday. So we get a lot out of that. But let's talk about integrity of amateurism a little bit. We've kind of touched on it, but what does that do long term to this? Are we going to be looking at separating collegiate athletics from collegiate academics at some point?
Well, that's one of the thoughts, and there's people that already have suggested maybe these really big money sports programs should just kind of create, because they're still part of these universities, they're owned by these universities. Maybe they just need to separate and create like this alternative pro league, like a minor league system with these teams, these college teams like become like semi-pro teams. I don't know how that would work. I think it'd be really hard to make that work. These colleges, these teams are so embedded. This history goes back so many generations. These alumni are so invested in these teams. I don't know how you make that work, but I do think there's going to have to be, like I said earlier, this is just a work in progress. I think it's going to continue to evolve over the years. Amateurism, what does it really mean to be an amateur now? That one time amateurs were, the Olympics were strictly for amateurs. And then, back in the 90s, they started allowing professional athletes to compete with those dream team basketball teams.
Yep.
The Olympics are a week away. And most of these athletes are not amateurs by any means. They have huge endorsement deals. Many of them are already pro athletes competing in basketball and other sports. So I think it's possible that college sports will eventually look similar to what we see in the Olympics.
I think you're right. Yeah. And you've already got a lot of professional level athletes who play and earn their money here, but then they go back to the Czech Republic or they go back to Lithuania, to play for their home country. And so basically you've just reshuffled the NBA and now you're playing in the Olympics. Where you may have had teammates 2 weeks ago. Now they're opponents.
Yeah. And the NBA is a good example because they have a lot of international players. And some of these teams are the U.S. Olympic basketball, they've already lost two scrimmage games, right? It doesn't look good.
No.
I know with the NHL, because the Winter Olympics, they have hockey, and every player for every country that sends a hockey team to the Winter Olympics, they're all NHL players. All these Eastern Bloc nations,
absolutely,
European countries. Those guys are all NHL caliber players. There's no college boys like we used to have back in the day.
Yeah, and I think that's what made it such a big deal when the U.S. won the 1980 Olympics, the hockey gold. Because it was a bunch of amateurs playing against the best that Russia had. I mean, they're pro players, right?
That Red Army team, they were full-time. I mean, trust me, the captain of the Red Army team was not driving a tank Monday through Friday. He was a full-time pro player. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And that team, just a month before the Olympics, they toured North America and they beat an NHL All-Star team.
Sure.
They were
no joke.
I mean, in the world.
Yeah. And they were playing rank amateurs.
They were playing true college players.
Yeah. Boy, times have changed. We're dating ourselves though. Let's talk a little bit about these last couple of points here. You got the colleges and the universities keep their money. What do you mean by that?
Well, so this money, this is all these athletes, they're on their own to negotiate these NIL deals, and they get paid by these businesses, these corporations that want to hire these athletes to use their images, to have them do endorsement deals, to have them be pitch people for products. So the colleges aren't going to, they're these big revenue sports, these big time athletic departments that we talked about earlier, they're not going to have to share that money with these athletes at this point. There's no pay for play. So in many ways, the dynamics, the main structure, the architecture of big time college sports hasn't been altered in terms of who the players are, the power figures in terms of the athletic departments, these big coaches, the NCAA, they're still intact as before. Now, whether or not they can continue to have this walled garden that doesn't allow student athletes to be compensated in the way that coaches are and whatnot, that remains to be seen. But as it stands now, they continue the status quo in that regard.
And the colleges cannot incentivize beyond what they're doing, right? They can't compete with benefits. Like I said, they're pretty much stuck doing what they do in terms of recruiting, right?
Right.
So what does this mean for small businesses? We talked a little bit about this, and we're going to wrap up with how this affects small business. So if you've hung with us this far, then you're you're interested in the topic, and B, you can stand the two of us. But three is, you probably wondered, what does this mean for small businesses? Now, like Milo's Tea is not an international brand like Nike, right?
No.
So if I'm in a small college town, if I've got Russ's Pizza, how does pizza always end up somehow making an appearance in these broadcasts? So I've got Russ's Pizza, and we've got a pretty good basketball team. Well, how does that work for me?
I think it creates a really interesting opportunity for small business. And like Russ's Pizza is a good example. Or think of even a local business in Cherokee. Maybe somebody opens up a new restaurant or a new store of some kind, and they want to have some kind of a kickoff, right? And they want to kind of spice it up and, have, maybe get somebody to come out there with one of those inflatable jumps for the kids, and they want to be giving out hot dogs and free drinks, and they want to have a celebration. Well, obviously the Cadillac standard would be to maybe bring in like an NBA player or an NFL player to sign autographs and take selfies. But if you're a small business owner, that's probably going to be out of your budget. Probably just not going to be possible.
Right. Yeah.
But now with these NIL deals, well, maybe you could hire a couple of football players or basketball players or volleyball players from a nearby university, from WCU or from Mars Hill, to come out for the day and hang out and take selfies and do autographs. That's probably pretty feasible. And that would probably be a hit. People would probably really get into it. They'd probably be really excited to go meet some college athletes like that.
Is this going to hurt the market for has-been athletes who have retired and they are the ones who show up at the car dealership openings and maybe the Toyota-thons? Does this push them out?
That reminds me, when I was a kid back in Detroit, there was an ex-NFL player. His name was Mel Farr, and he had these car dealerships. Mel Farr Superstar for a far better deal. And he'd come in on a dressed like a superhero and fly around like this really cheap 1970s animated television commercial. That's a really good question, though. I'll joking aside, that's a really good question, and you do have to wonder, is that going to dilute the market? I mean, now you've just got this whole new wave of celebrity endorsers, and what does that mean for somebody who's retired? These lower tier pro players. I mean, a market can only sustain so many players, so many products. I think that's a good question. It's possible it's going to, maybe these NIL deals won't be as lucrative as a lot of people think. I think for a lot of these kids, it's probably going to be, maybe a little 5-figure payday here and there.
It's still pretty good.
Still pretty good for a 19-year-old student athlete, but
at least on the local level, even with big University of Texas, Texas A&M, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, as big as they are, and those are what I would consider international brands. You look at people all over the world. There's a band in Russia that I follow. They do great Chicago covers, and the drummer's always wearing his Ohio State. I don't even think he speaks English, but he's a huge Ohio State fan. So these are international brands, but you've always got the local insurance company, right? That's sponsoring the first 3 parking spaces next to the gate, or they're sponsoring if Jim Bob kicks 3 field goals today, everybody comes by for a free ice cream cone. So you've got those, but now you can say, okay, the kicker, Jim Bob, I don't know why his name's Jim Bob, but Jim Bob is now being endorsed by the ice cream shop down the street, and
now Jim Bob can come out and scoop the ice cream himself
and sign autographs.
Yeah.
So it's going to be very interesting to watch this as we go forward, to see if small businesses, especially now when, post-pandemic, we're looking at inflation, we're looking at another what the SBA is estimating, another 36 million small businesses potentially closing up in the next 3 years as a direct result of COVID. And when we talk to small businesses, the one thing that keeps coming up is, I need more customers. I want more customers. Of course, a lot of them need more employees too, but I want more people in the door. And if they see this as an opportunity to get more people in the door, and it's a good investment versus spending their money on newspaper, radio advertising, billboards. I really see this as a burgeoning opportunity, or maybe not burgeoning, but brand new nascent opportunity. It's just being born. And I think a lot of small businesses could take advantage of that. I would like to see them. And I really thought that I was going to hate this, Shawn. I thought I was going to hate this whole idea. I didn't like it when I first heard about it. I'm thinking they're getting an education. They shouldn't have. But, if EA Sports is going to put their face on the cover of the NCAA championship football game, and it's as big as Madden, why shouldn't these college athletes benefit from that? So I guess I'm liking it a little bit better. I'm probably just as neutral as I was when we started, but I have a much better understanding of why and where it's going. And I'm just going to let you wrap up, because you did a lot of research on this. You really studied this, and I can just tell by the way you carry yourself, you're a much better athlete than I was. So I'll let you have last word.
Well, I think going forward, I think the sky is really the limit in terms of where this goes and what this means for college sports, for amateur sports. But I just really want to encourage young people to think big picture. And like I said earlier, sports are a great opportunity to learn, to grow. But I think as a society, we've gotten a little carried away with regard to sports. And I mentioned the bubble idea. And I think that, again, I think as a society, we have in many ways an unhealthy fixation on sports. And I hope that doesn't get worse as a result of what we have here. And by all means, I think anybody with a small business that's interested in expanding their marketing or their advertising approach, this is just one more idea that might be worth considering. So everybody out there, stay healthy, stay safe, and have fun. Summer's here.
And put your Bitcoin in local college athletes.
There you go.
All right, my friend, I thank you so much for doing this. This has been a lot of fun and very informative. Folks, we at Sequoia Fund are here to help you with anything that you need for your small business, whether it's money or advice and counsel, training. Give us a call. And as we close out, I want to tell you a little bit about our housing rehab loans for enrolled members of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, up to $25,000 at 4% interest. Can't go wrong with that. Now is the time, now that lumber prices are coming back down. Fix that house up. Do that project that you've been thinking about doing. There's no excuses for that. Until next time, I'm Russ Siegel with Sequoia Fund. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time on Sequoia Fund Live.